The old-timers in Copper Ridge always said that some stories are too wild to believe, even when they're staring you right in the face. But on a frost-bitten morning in late October, when ranch hand Dylan Cross stumbled upon something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about second chances, those same old-timers would finally understand that sometimes the most impossible miracles happen to the people who need them most. What he found chained to that ancient oak tree would not only save a life, it would transform an entire community and prove that even the most broken souls can find their way back to hope. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The morning mist hung thick over Copper Ridge like a gray funeral shroud, and Dylan Cross pulled his worn denim jacket tighter against the October chill as he walked the fence line of the old Whitmore Ranch. At 38, Dylan had the weathered hands of a man who'd spent his life fixing what others had broken. His lean frame moved with careful precision, and the deep lines around his green eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights counting bills he couldn't pay. The Whitmore place had been his home for 3 years now, ever since old Benjamin Whitmore offered him work in exchange for the small cabin behind the main house. It wasn't much, 1,000 acres of Montana grassland with sagging fences and weed-filled pastures. But for a man with nowhere else to go and a past he'd rather forget, it was salvation wrapped in barbed wire and morning chores. Dylan had been checking fence lines since dawn when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It started low, almost like wind moaning through the pines, but there was something distinctly alive about it, something in pain. He followed the sound deeper into the forest, his heart racing as he pushed through serviceberry bushes and emerged into a small clearing dominated by a massive oak tree. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Collapsed at the base of the oak was the largest horse Dylan had ever seen. The animal was easily 18 hands high, with a coat so black it seemed to absorb the pale morning light. But it was the chains that made Dylan's stomach lurch. Thick, heavy chains wrapped around the horse's neck and body, securing it to the ancient tree like some medieval prisoner. The metal had cut deep into the animal's hide, leaving raw, weeping wounds that told the story of desperate struggles to break free. The horse's breathing was shallow and ragged. Its ribs showed starkly beneath the black coat, and Dylan could see it hadn't eaten properly in days, maybe weeks. But what stopped Dylan's heart was the piece of paper tied to the chain around the horse's neck. With trembling hands, he untied the note and unfolded it, squinting to read the hastily scrawled words. "His name is Goliath. I can't feed him anymore. He's too big, too wild, too much trouble. Maybe someone else can save him. I'm sorry." The note wasn't signed, but Dylan could see water stains on the paper. Whether from rain or tears, he couldn't tell. Goliath's eyes were the color of deep amber, and when they met Dylan's gaze, he saw something that pierced straight through to his soul. A desperate, intelligent awareness that seemed to be asking one simple question: "Are you here to help, or are you here to watch me die?" Dylan had never owned a horse in his life. Hell, he could barely afford to feed himself, let alone a 1,000-pound animal. The smart thing would be to call the sheriff's office and let animal control handle it. They'd probably decide the kindest thing would be to put the poor creature out of his misery. But as Dylan knelt beside Goliath's massive head and looked into those amber eyes, he found himself whispering words that surprised even him. "I'm going to get you out of here, boy. I don't know how, but I'm not leaving you to die." The horse's ear flickered toward him, and Dylan could have sworn he saw the faintest spark of hope kindle in those intelligent eyes. He ran back to his cabin and returned with every tool he could carry: bolt cutters, wire cutters, a hacksaw, and an old pry bar. The work was slow and painstaking, and several times he had to stop when Goliath tried to struggle, afraid the animal would injure itself further. But gradually, link by link, he began to free the giant horse from its metal prison. As he worked, Dillon found himself talking to Goliath in a low, steady voice, the way his grandfather used to talk to spooked cattle. He told the horse about the ranch, about the pasture where it could run free, about the hay and the barn and the clear stream. Goliath seemed to calm at the sound of his voice, breathing more steadily as the chains fell away. When the last chain hit the ground with a metallic clang, Goliath didn't immediately try to stand. Instead, the great horse lay still, as if he couldn't quite believe he was truly free. Then, slowly, carefully, he began to test his newfound freedom. His first attempt to rise failed, but on the second try, with a grunt of effort that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, Goliath heaved himself upright.
Dillon had expected Goliath to bolt. Most horses would have run the moment they were free. Instead, Goliath turned that magnificent head toward him and took a single careful step in his direction. Then another, and another, until he stood close enough that Dillon could feel the warmth radiating from the horse's massive body. Very slowly, Dillon raised his hand toward Goliath's muzzle. The horse didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he lowered his great head and allowed Dillon to stroke the velvet-soft nose, his amber eyes never leaving Dillon's face. In that moment, something passed between man and horse, an understanding, a bond, a mutual recognition of two souls who had both known abandonment and were ready to trust again. "Come on, Goliath," Dillon said softly. "Let's go home." The walk back should have been simple, less than half a mile through fairly level terrain, but Goliath's condition was worse than Dillon had realized. The great horse could only manage a few dozen steps before needing to rest, his breathing becoming labored with even minimal exertion. But Goliath refused to give up. Every time he stumbled, he caught himself. Every time he had to stop and rest, he would look at Dillon with those remarkable eyes and then push forward again. It took them nearly 2 hours to cover what should have been a 15-minute walk, but when they finally emerged from the forest and Goliath saw the ranch spread out before him, something changed in the horse's posture. His head came up higher, his ears pricked forward, and Dillon could have sworn he saw recognition in the animal's gaze, not of this specific place, but of what it represented: safety, food, a chance to heal, a chance to trust again. When Benjamin Whitmore returned from town that evening, he stopped dead at the sight of the enormous black horse standing peacefully in his barn. At 72, Benjamin had seen enough of life to know that surprises usually meant trouble. But when Dillon explained how he'd found Goliath chained to the forest, the old rancher's weathered face softened with genuine emotion. "Son," Benjamin said quietly, running a gnarled hand along Goliath's neck, "I've been around horses my whole life, and I can tell you something about this one. This isn't just any animal. This is the kind of horse that comes along once in a lifetime, if you're lucky." The first week was touch and go. Dr. Patricia Vance, the local veterinarian, made emergency visits every other day. "She's severely malnourished," she told Dillon after her first examination. "Those chain wounds are infected, and her digestive system is going to need time to adjust to regular feeding. This is going to be a long process, and there's no guarantee he'll make a full recovery." But Dr. Vance also saw something in Goliath that gave her hope. Despite his weakened condition, the horse's spirit remained unbroken. He submitted patiently to her examinations and showed none of the fear or aggression she typically saw in abused animals. Dillon established a careful routine designed around Goliath's recovery: early morning feedings of small portions, gentle walks to build strength, and afternoon grooming sessions where he would talk quietly about whatever came to mind. Goliath seemed to look forward to these sessions, nickering softly when he saw Dillon approaching. Sometimes Dillon would catch himself telling Goliath things he'd never told another living soul: his fears, his regrets, his hopes that maybe this time he was doing something right. As the days passed, Goliath began to transform. The hollow places in his flanks filled out, the wounds on his neck healed cleanly. Most remarkably, his coat developed a shine that made him look like a horse carved from polished stone. But the most dramatic change was Goliath's behavior. The quiet, patient resignation gradually gave way to something Dylan had never expected to see: playfulness. Goliath would trot over to the fence whenever Dylan appeared, tossing his great head and nickering like an oversized puppy. One morning in early November, Dylan arrived at the barn to find Goliath standing at the gate, pawing impatiently. When Dylan opened it, instead of walking calmly to his feed bin, Goliath burst past him and actually cantered across the pasture, his tail flagged high and his powerful legs eating up the ground with breathtaking grace. For the first time, Dylan was seeing Goliath as he was meant to be, not as a victim or a rescue case, but as a magnificent creature in his prime, powerful and proud and utterly alive. The sight brought tears to his eyes.
Word about Goliath spread through Copper Ridge with the speed that news travels in small communities, and before long, people started finding excuses to drive by the Whitmore Ranch just to catch a glimpse of the legendary horse. Emma Rodriguez brought her 8-year-old daughter, Lisa, who had been struggling with anxiety since her parents' divorce. Lisa was a quiet child who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her small shoulders. But something magical happened when Lisa saw Goliath. The great horse walked across the pasture with deliberate purpose, lowered his head until it was level with Lisa's, and the child reached through the fence and touched his nose. From that day forward, Emma brought Lisa to visit every weekend, and Dylan could see the change in her, the way she started walking with her head up, the way she began to smile again. Marcus Williams, a local teenager with a reputation as a troublemaker, started showing up at the ranch after school, asking if there was any work he could do in exchange for spending time with the horse. Dylan put him to work mucking stalls, expecting the boy to lose interest. Instead, Marcus threw himself into the work with surprising intensity. His anger began to fade, replaced by quiet focus. His grades improved. He stopped getting into fights. One evening, Dylan found Marcus sitting in Goliath's stall with the great horse's head resting gently in his lap. The boy was talking quietly, confessions about feeling lost, admissions about being scared, promises to do better. Goliath listened with the patience of a priest taking confession, and Dylan saw tears streaming down the teenager's cheeks. The transformation in the community was subtle but undeniable. People who had been feuding for years found themselves standing side by side at Goliath's fence, united in their awe. Children who had been afraid of horses begged to meet Goliath. Adults who hadn't smiled in months found themselves grinning as they watched the great horse play. Dylan was beginning to understand that Goliath was something special, something beyond his previous experience or understanding. The horse had an intuitive ability to sense what each person needed and provide exactly that, whether it was patience for a frightened child, steady companionship for a troubled teenager, or simple acceptance for adults who felt lost and alone. But Goliath's most profound impact was on Dylan himself. For the first time in years, Dylan found himself looking forward to getting up in the morning. His days had structure and purpose beyond simple survival. The constant worry that had been his companion for so long began to ease. He began to feel like he belonged somewhere again. The steady stream of visitors meant he was interacting with more people than he had in years, and to his surprise, he found himself enjoying the conversations. One busy Saturday, as Dylan was explaining Goliath's exercise routine to fascinated visitors, he caught sight of his reflection in the barn window. The man looking back at him was someone he barely recognized. Upright, confident, animated, alive in a way he hadn't been in years. That night, as Dylan was doing evening chores, Goliath followed him around the barn like a gigantic dog, occasionally bumping him with his nose or playfully tugging at his jacket. Dylan found himself laughing, and he realized that laughter had become a regular part of his life again. "You know, boy," Dylan said as he filled Goliath's water trough, "I thought I was rescuing you that day in the forest, but I'm starting to think you might have been rescuing me."
Goliath whinnied softly and pushed his great head against Dylan's shoulder, and Dylan could almost swear the horse understood exactly what he meant.
5 years after finding Goliath chained to that oak tree, Dylan stood in the main barn of the Goliath Recovery Ranch, a thriving therapeutic program that had grown beyond anything he dared to imagine. Benjamin had donated 40 acres, donations had poured in from people touched by Goliath's story, and proper facilities had been built with accessible pathways and specialized equipment. Additional horses had been carefully selected, volunteers trained, and partnerships established with hospitals, mental health centers, and veterans organizations throughout the region. But at the heart of it all remained Goliath, the magnificent black horse who had been found chained to a tree with a note claiming he was too wild and dangerous to be saved. Every morning, Dylan would find Goliath waiting at the gate, ready for another day of healing work, his amber eyes bright with what could only be described as purpose. Families traveled from across the country to participate in week-long intensive programs. Military veterans found solace in Goliath's patient presence. Children with autism, depression, anxiety, and physical disabilities discovered abilities they never knew they possessed. Over 90% of participants reported significant improvement after working with Goliath. That evening, as Dylan completed his final rounds, he found Goliath waiting for him in their old ritual spot by the pasture gate. The great horse nickered softly and pushed his head against Dylan's shoulder in the gesture of affection that had become as familiar as breathing. Dylan wrapped his arms around Goliath's powerful neck and pressed his face against the warm, glossy coat. 5 years ago, he had been a broken man with nowhere to go and nothing to offer. Tonight, he was the director of a thriving therapeutic program that had touched hundreds of lives. "Thank you," Dylan whispered into Goliath's mane, as he had done countless times over the years. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for showing me what I was supposed to do with my life." Goliath blew softly through his nostrils, a sound Dylan had learned to interpret as contentment. And together, they stood in the quiet darkness, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their past. This incredible story of Goliath and Dylan proves that sometimes the most broken souls are capable of the most extraordinary healing. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of second chances and unexpected miracles. Let us know in the comments below what part of Goliath's story touched your heart the most.